So we are going to get started. Cancel culture. That's what we're talking about today. Feel free to put in the chat, hi Nugget, your definition of cancel culture as you understand it. As you understand cancel culture, what does that mean? I'm going to wait for a few minutes, just like a minute or two, while I see people's responses, and then I'll go ahead and define it. So as you understand cancel culture, what is that definition? Go ahead and put it in the chat. So cancel culture is when, based on someone's behavior, well, sometimes that's not even true. So it is the interesting cultural phenomenon. Cancel culture is the cultural phenomenon where, by jury of public opinion, an individual is deemed any number of synonyms, but problematic, and therefore needs to be canceled by again, jury of popular opinion. And the repercussions often, or the additional trademarks, hallmarks of cancel culture that we see are that person being shunned, a loss of support, not just for their financial endeavors, but a loss of community, a loss of access to support or resources, a loss of access to community in any way to help facilitate any growth. And it's also, by proxy, if people associate with the person who has been canceled, you are then subject to be canceled yourself if you are not appropriately, and this is very air quotes, appropriately, no one's trying to cancel me, look. We're just talking about this concept today. People spidering out from that central person who was canceled can be canceled simply by association as well. So those are some of the hallmarks that we see a lot of the time. And some of the arguments for cancel culture are really interesting in that they center around this idea of powerlessness, and cancel culture being the only, this is a rhetoric I hear a lot. People say cancel culture is the only tool that, like, name your marginalized group, have against some people. I think that's interesting. We're going to examine that a little bit again today as well. So I will also plainly state that I am pretty categorically against cancel culture. That is my bias in this conversation. I will also state that that is a new stance for me to take. I was very pro cancel culture up until, I would say, as recently as a year ago. As recently as a year ago, I was very pro cancel culture. I wanted a sense of control over my world. I wanted a sense of justice in a place that felt very unjust. And I thought that cancel culture was a phenomenal medium. Not even phenomenal, I wouldn't even say that. But cancel culture was at least a tool in my toolkit that I definitely was going to not let go of. Like, pry it from my cold dead lifeless fingers kind of a moment for me. And my opinion around that has severely shifted in the last year, to the point where I say cancel culture, by and large, I am against it. I think stance on it after getting a lot more education around it and reading some new takes on it and getting some nuanced discussion around it. And so I wanted to share that with other people. I will also really clearly state I am in no way an expert on this. I am in no way an expert on cancel culture. I have personal experience around this. I have done a healthy amount of reading around it. I have done a significant amount, not a small amount, of deep dives on varied opinions on the internet, trying to really get a comprehensive understanding of what it is at large versus what my myopic experience of it is, an understanding of it is. So it's not from a complete place of ignorance. Hey, Jesse, that I come to this conversation, but it is not from a place of expertise that I come to this conversation. With cancel culture, is there like an end? Is this something to get out of? I super appreciate you saying this, because that is so unclear. That's a really huge, glaring pitfall of people who engage in cancel culture, because there's no path out of it. It is so nebulous. It is undefined. There is no container, meaning there's no parameters. There's no boundaries around cancel culture. It is mob. It's pure mob mentality, and it's subjected to everyone's experience. You're allowed to get excited, Jesse. It's fine. Ultimately, it's very divisive in a time when we need to come together. I would agree with a lot of that statement too. Here's another thing I find. I find that people will use the example, and I'm going to probably reference these people a couple of times, of like Harry Weinstein, or even something as recent as J.K. Rowling, and how cancel culture is appropriate in these instances. And to be completely honest, I think in circumstances like that, where there is unchecked astronomical power, completely unchecked astronomical power, I don't think cancel culture is as harmful as it is when it's scaled down to micro levels, when it's scaled down to communities, when it's scaled down to influencers. Like that, it does not scale down. Cancel culture is the action of that, the tidal wave that happens is a response by people who feel marginalized and powerless to try to de-seat people in positions of power. But going back to human beings not doing, going back to what you said, it's easier for a crowd to cheer than to think. I think that's a pretty profound way to put that. Yeah. It doesn't have anything to do with, I don't know where I pronounce it. Okay, great. Yeah. So that position of power, right? When we're talking intercommunities, when we're talking small scale, that perceived level of power, that being an influencer, that small level of power, that parasocial relationship is so skewed from what actually that person as a human is experiencing. And it is not effective in community building. It's not creating positive, healthy environments for any of us to engage in when we utilize this tool of cancel culture within communities. Even with someone who is like an influencer who has a couple million views. Someone who is an influencer who has a couple million views is not in the same universe when we're talking about power dynamics as a Harvey Weinstein or a J.K. Rowling. People in the 1%, I think trying to visualize the distance between the people of those unchecked levels of power and your favorite influencer, I think that distance is exceedingly difficult to comprehend as a human being. That scale is hard for us to fathom how different those leagues are. And that's not what, in my definition, and I'm not saying that this is the only definition of it, but the definition I'm functionally using in this conversation is that cancel culture is this tidal wave. It is not an instance of like an interpersonal conflict. It is a tidal wave of ostracization. Sorry, that word is hard for me. Shunning, and then punishment by association. It also utilizes a very colonizing tool, a very white supremacist tool of punishment. This idea of punishment in society. There are other ways to engage in society. There are other ways to engage in justice. There are other ways to engage in safety without using punishment as a tool. There's many instances of that. This idea that punishment is the most effective or the primary tool that we should be using in terms of conflict or in terms of harm, in terms of mitigating harm, is like I said, very a colonized lens. It's through a white supremacist lens. One of the, and a position that I held for a very long time, is that cancel culture is for when populations who are marginalized are desperately railing against people in positions of power, and it's like the only tool that we have to fight back. And I see where that's coming from, right? I think a lot of people come to that conclusion or come to that realization for themselves when they feel powerless. I know that for me, when I thought back to like my instances of abuse or my own instances of SA or my own instances of seeing the racism in the world around me, that it didn't seem like I had any power to affect or impact. It was like, oh yeah, well, no, we can just cancel that person. And then that's the little control that I can take back in my world and in the world to stop harm. And I can really relate to that feeling. I can really relate to wanting that and wanting there to be something that I can do to feel like the world is a little bit safer, and the world someone isn't going to be allowed to perpetually harm more people. I'm helping, right? That's definitely how I felt about it in large part. And what I've realized though is that that's not the result that ever happens. That's not the result that ever happens. And when I scratch the surface of it and start to try to like, okay, well, let me actually define the shit I just said. Like, to stop harm. How do I define harm? Well, harm isn't always black and white. Someone can feel harmed, and they legitimately felt harmed in a situation. Their reality, their experience is that of harm. No one can take that away. That is true for them. And it also can be true in some instances that the other person didn't objectively do anything that they had any knowledge or way to prevent. Any way of preventing that thing. That doesn't mean the other person wasn't harmed. But it also doesn't mean that the person who did the harm isn't also being harmed by that interaction. Yeah, Dive, that's a good way to put that. Sure. So when you look at each individual circumstance in cancel culture, scratch the surface a bit more and start diving into it and being like, okay, well, if cancel culture is appropriate in some instances but not in others, when is it appropriate to employ it, right? To employ cancel culture if it's appropriate in some situations but not in others, if we can agree to that. Because I think everyone can agree that in some circumstances cancel culture isn't appropriate. Their emotional and nervous system responses. Yes, absolutely. So when we start talking about when is it appropriate and where's the line? Yeah, what I kept getting at is the more you dive into every specific circumstance, the more you scratch the surface and actually get into the nuance of what happened, where these people are coming from, it becomes rarer and rarer and rarer that you would ever actually employ the tool of cancel culture. Because what cancel culture does is it erases the humanity, the complexity of and the humanity of the person you have labeled as done harm. Once that's been slapped on the forehead, this person has done harm. That's all that people see. They're not a person anymore. They're not the sum of their experiences. They are just actually create safer community. Because that's the goal, right? The goal is to create communities that are safer for people to interact with. We also need to define what safe is. And safe, I had a whole series. If anyone is on my Instagram, go look at this past week's series on how I talk about safety. Because most of the time, what I'm encountering is when people are talking about safety, they're talking about a subjective feeling. They're not talking about risk mitigation and awareness. Those two things. So yeah, often when I see people talking about safety, they're talking about a subjective feeling. They're not talking about mitigating risk. So often. Not always, but very, very often I feel that. And so when we're talking about trying to create spaces that just have this subjective feeling of safety, a couple of things happen. One, that changes for every single human being. Every single individual who encounters that space has a different feeling around that. And so therefore you can't employ many standards of practice or procedures that will accommodate everyone. That's not possible. So when you're talking about community building, you have to have some kinds of standards of procedures, standards of practice that mitigate risk. And the things that mitigate risk, when we're looking at actual numbers and data, might not actually feel safe to some people. And actually, I think that's okay in some instances. Some people I teach experiential workshops. It's a great example. For my workshops, I am creating a container for people to have experiences. I mitigate risk and I provide in real-time support and will handle any conflict that arises in those workshops. Some people come and experience a feeling of unsafety there, and it's a growth moment. It's really healthy and good for them because they felt the unsafety. They had the supports of the people around them. They had the experience that they needed to have along with people who were there to help them if they needed it. And so their nervous system got to feel what it felt like to move through that feeling and get to the other side where it's like, oh, man, that felt really unsafe, but I'm looking back and I had a really positive time. And that was really profound and important. And the experience that I had as I'm coming out of that has helped me in a way in my life. They had to have access to a feeling of unsafety there in order for that to shift and move through within the container of someone mitigating risk and facilitating that, right? So sometimes the ability of people to access places that don't feel safe is important to creating healthy community. Recognizing someone's humanity doesn't abdicate them from accountability, right? And being kind and compassionate to someone as they take accountability actually tends to make the accountability way more profound and successful. That's what changes society. That's what changes communities to be healthy and positive and inclusionary and restorative and safe places for people to mess up. Because if you can't make a mistake in a community, it's actually not a safe place. I know we talked about the nebulous and subjective definition of the word safety, but if you can't make a mistake within the community that you're in, how comfortable can you really be? How included can you really feel? How seen can you really feel in that community? And that's what cancel culture is the antithesis of. It means that making mistakes is no longer an option. If someone really doesn't know that they're doing anything wrong in a moment, it doesn't mean that what they're doing isn't wrong. It doesn't mean that what they're doing isn't harmful, but it does mean that they didn't have the tools that they needed to not do that thing, right? So we can give them those tools. Cancel culture doesn't give anyone any tools. Cancel culture does not give anyone any tools to improve any of the situation. It just seeks to punish and separate because of a feeling of powerlessness and the need for control.